Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Puranamunina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayanim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikatpanaye Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sudam Devam Kamsachanura Mardhanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you for joining us again, and belated Happy Vishu. Yesterday was Vishu, one of the most important festivals in Kerala, where Amma's from, and where she is right now. So in case you didn't get to watch the celebrations in Amritapuri, I would like to share some of Amma's words from the occasion, because one part of her words ties in quite well with the topic that we're learning now in chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita. First, Amma touched on the beauty of the Vishu tradition, which is a festival that celebrated the beginning of the zodiac year, which means when the sun enters into Aries. Here in the Midwest of USA, that actually took place in the late afternoon of Tuesday. But the celebration is one that is done in the morning. So it became yesterday morning, our time, and of course, Wednesday morning, their time. So the tradition is that, like, the grandmother typically will sleep in the altar room or the shrine room of the house, traditionally. And then she sees the altar first in the morning, and then she goes and brings the children, covers their eyes so they cannot see anything, and then when she takes them into the family shrine in the house, then she removes her hands, and so that the first thing they see on the first day of the year, the solar year, will be the altar. And it's full of flowers, and it'll be decorated beautifully with other things like an abundance of fruits and grains and so many other things, malas on the deities. So it's a beautiful way to begin the year. And Amma said that Vishu morning symbolizes the importance of entering the new year seeing goodness and thinking good thoughts. Whatever activity commences with the remembrance of God will be auspicious. So if you have the remembrance of God, the very first thing when you wake up on the new year, that means the whole year is going to be auspicious. That's the concept. And she said, taking in Vishu Karni, which is that beautifully decorated altar, upon waking, helps us begin the new year with the darshan of, or the vision of God and nature, because you have all the fruits and flowers and grains there. A little digression just to tell you a humorous version of that. We were in Australia I don't know, it must have been, by now it's got to be like 6 or 7 or 8 years ago. And two of Amma's nephews were there, both doctors actually. And it was their first time leaving India. And of course they wanted to go be with Amma. So we were in Australia, and it was during the retreat in Melbourne. And, Vishu was celebrated there. We didn't have much of a celebration because it's not an Australian tradition. But to these two nephews of Amma's, it was so important to them. And so what they did was, they were normally sleeping somewhere else, but that night before Vishu, they slept in the same facility where Amma and the rest of the Swamis were staying. And what they did was they traced the direction to go to Amma's room. And these are guys who were, Amma held them as babies, and she's played with them since they were little. So they have this real intimate relationship with Amma. So they woke up on Vishu morning, and it was early. It was really early. Normally, no one's going to do something like this, but they crawled on all fours to Amma's room without opening their eyes, tracking the way through by touching things. And then they knocked on Amma's door, which is like completely unbelievable for us, but it's like for them it's their family. And then Lakshmi, Amma's Lakshmi, who's now Swamini Sri Lakshmi. She was so surprised. Who would be knocking on the door this time? She opened, and then Amma let them come in, and they had that darshan of Amma on Vishu. Don't try that, okay? That's not for everybody. That's not for you unless you're Amma's. You have her permission. But it just shows how important of a festival it is for the people from that part of the world. And Amma pointed out that even though it is boiling hot in South India this time of year, it was actually 92 degrees over there yesterday, nature still manages to produce flowers, which are then used to decorate the altar. So, typically when it's hot, we all just go inside and we don't do, things that we normally would do because it's too hot outside. But no, Mother Nature keeps producing flowers even when it's really hot. So Amma said that this shows that even in the midst of difficult times, happiness can be found. And obviously she's indirectly referring to the challenges of COVID times. But the part of Amma's talk that connects Vishu with chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita began when she said, another meaning of the word Vishu is being equal. That's because she said that Vishu takes place when day and night are about the same duration, because it's just after the spring equinox. So first, Amma used this symbolism of equality, or being equal, to talk about the importance of being able to accept both joyful and difficult circumstances with mental equanimity. And this is perfectly in line with one of the virtues that Krishna instructed us to cultivate in verse 10 of this chapter. He said, constant even-mindedness in both desirable and undesirable circumstances. So we already have a connection. Then Amma said, Vishu is an occasion to remember how important it is to love and serve the Creator through the creation. Now that might be a familiar quote to a lot of us, but when studying this section of the Gita, we should strive to obtain a deeper meaning from those same words. Because another meaning of the word Vishu is existing everywhere, as in the word Vishuvrat. The Sanskrit word Vishuvrat basically means God exists everywhere. Even in the tiny ant and in a worm, this God is present there. So that's why Amma tells us to love and serve the entire creation. But we should also try to understand, in what sense does God exist everywhere? And that is what Krishna explained last week in verse 15 of this chapter. He said, Brahman sustains all, which means how does it sustain it? In the sense of giving existence, or it's called Sat, to all things. So we have to understand that through a more familiar example. We have like this table that I'm sitting at. let's take that as a example. So instead of pure Brahman, we point to the table and we say, this is the table, and Brahman is associated with the table as the existence principle. It is Brahman that gives the isness to the table. So that is how Brahman sustains everything, especially the non-sentient beings. It's through the isness. The table is here. That is existence. And so Brahman is absolute existence. So in that sense, Brahman is associated with it, or the chair, or whatever it may be. But then he also said Brahman is also unattached. Like a movie screen projects, it reflects all of the things happening in a movie. It's not affected by them. And when the movie's over, the screen is as it was before. So in that sense, also, Brahman is the unmoving, unaffected substratum of eternal existence, upon which all non-eternal happenings take place. Now, what is that all non-eternal happenings? What does that include? Well, it includes all 125 billion galaxies that are known so far, this whole universe. So since we're studying the Gita now, we should remember this additional dimension to the Vishu festival, understanding God's all-pervasive nature more deeply in the sense of Brahman, the absolute or supreme being. And that's what we're going to do today. So we're celebrating, Vishu is not over yet, we're also celebrating it today by understanding this concept. And Amma concluded her talk by saying, may we help make this world a tree full of flowers of happiness and fruits of peace. May every day in your life be filled with the joy and auspiciousness of Vishu. And what is the highest happiness, the highest peace, the highest joy, the highest auspiciousness? That is moksha, liberation. And that's what Krishna is going to talk about today. So it's the ultimate Vishu today. Okay. Now, the language that is used in this context is a little tricky at times. So Jnanadev, that saint I keep referring to, about 500, 600 years ago, I can't remember. He comes to the rescue and gives a helpful explanation. So this is what he says. Since the supreme Brahman is one absolute truth, there is no scope for duality, like referring to the pervading and then the one who is pervading or the pervader, or this is all duality. So he says we are compelled to make use of symbolic expressions, including dualism, because all language is dualism, right? In order to convey the idea of oneness. And then he makes a really beautiful point that just doesn't occur to you normally. Even for the purpose of representing zero, it becomes necessary to mark a cipher, that sign of zero, as a token. It's a token, it's a symbol that represents something that means nothing. Absolutely. But without that zero, you would say, now, add to that, what? No, you can't, how can you explain zero without saying it's a zero? It means the absence of everything else. You need that to convey that. Otherwise, you just sit there quietly and then nobody will know what you're talking about. Similarly, he says, the language of duality is needed when we use words to explain non-duality. Otherwise, the guru-disciple tradition will cease to exist and all talk will come to a standstill. And we're not ready for that standstill. I think we need those words to understand. Thus, the scriptures employ the method of propounding non-dualism through the figurative language of duality. So don't look at the defects of the examples that are given because they are never going to be adequate to express Brahman. There will always be some element of duality there. But you need that until you've gone beyond duality, and then you don't need it. And then you don't need any teachings anyhow. So another beautiful quote is from a 19th century saint, well-known one, Ramakrishna Deva. He said, both the aspects, that with form and that without form, belong to the same God. Faith in one implies faith in the other. The fire and its heating property cannot be separated from each other. The sun and the sunbeams are inseparable. Milk and its whiteness are inseparable. Similarly, Brahman with attributes and Brahman without attributes are one and the same. It is not possible to conceive of one to the exclusion of the other. So in a way, this kind of puts to rest the discussion that was going, the heated discussion that was going on in the bhajans this morning. That you have to cultivate an awareness of both the Advaitic or the Vedantic aspect of God, as well as respect and love for the form. So now, after that introduction and refresher from last week, let us enter into the text for today, which we're going to start from verse 16. Actually, we were supposed to cover verse 16 last week, but we ran out of time. This week, I'm not going to guarantee how far we will go. We'll just see. So you can repeat after me. Bahirantascha bhutanam acharam charam evacha sukshmatvat tadavijñeyam durastam chantike chatat. So my rendition of this verse, you can see that's you can look at the screen and see that some of it is different. Inside and outside beings, the unmoving and also the moving, due to its subtlety, it is incomprehensible. It is far away and near. So it's a pretty sweeping editing of that verse. So Jnanadev helps us a little bit here by adding some commentary by saying, just as heat abides evenly in all diverse fires, like the fire could be considered to be the consciousness in us, that which abides in every created being, moving and unmoving, should be known as the object of knowledge. So that word came up before, jnayam. Jnayam means that which is to be known. And he is saying that just as heat abides evenly in all diverse fires, that which abides in every created being, it can be a living being, or it could be a rock, or a tree or something, that essence is what should be known, or what is to be known, because it's the same essence that we have. Plants have consciousness, they have existence, and a very limited form of consciousness, of course, not quite like what we would think from a human perspective. But they can feel, it's been proven that they can feel vibrations, they can feel our emotions. And because they have such a subtle sense that in other ways they are much more pervasive in their consciousness. There's a book about that anyhow, we won't go into that. But this is his additional commentary, which is helpful. So here Krishna says that Param Brahma, this is the subject, the it is Param Brahma, the Supreme Being. It's both within and outside of beings. The difficulty is that our experience is that mostly we see that consciousness evident in sentient beings. If someone says, which one seems more like consciousness, the rock or the human being? We're going to say the human being, because consciousness is present in the human beings, but even inactive or inert or insentient things still have Brahman. They're still permeated by Brahman, but not in the sense of chit, of consciousness, but in the sense of existence, sat. So Brahman is there, it's everywhere. And in the case of insentient things, it's just in the form of sat, existence. But in sentient beings, two aspects of Brahman are there, Chit and Sat, consciousness and existence. Now, in a realized being, in a jnani like Amma, well, I would say avatar like Amma, Brahman is evident not only as Sat and Chit, as existence and awareness, but it's also there in the form of Ananda, bliss. So what is the first name in Amma's 108 names? Om Purna Brahma Swarupinye Namaha. She, I bow down to her who is the full manifestation of Brahman. But what does that mean, the full manifestation of Brahman? We just chant the next verse, Om Satchidananda Murtaye Namaha. She, I bow down to her who is the embodiment of existence, awareness, and bliss. So she's the full manifestation of Brahman, which expresses itself as the embodiment of existence, awareness, and bliss. We are also Satchidananda, but we haven't realized it. Small difference, but a huge difference. So in inert objects, one aspect of Brahman, and sentient beings, two aspects, and in Amma, three aspects. So like Amma says, there are light bulbs with different watt ratings. There's 1 watt, 5 watt, 50 watt, 100 watt, and 1,000 watt light bulbs. And just as the ability to manifest the electricity increases with the wattage of the light bulb, the ability to manifest Brahman, the Supreme Being, increases with the inner capacity of the being. So I don't think we can give a wattage rating to Amma, it's like 1 trillion or just off the charts, beyond. But as our spiritual growth evolves, then we also will be able to manifest more and more of that eternal light of consciousness. So here's a story to give you an example, a story that took place almost 40 years ago. It was December 1981. I was 13. I don't know how old you were at that time or whether you were even born, or you went to people who were watching. And Amma responded to a brahmachari's question. And the question was about samadhi. He wanted to know about samadhi and sahaja samadhi in particular, which is that constant state of samadhi, which is really Amma's state. She just hides it from us. Because otherwise, you'll see, when you hear the story, you'll realize it's inspiring, but we can't interact. We couldn't interact with her like we interact with her today. Back then she was always going into samadhi. So his question was about samadhi, and Amma responded to it, and she ended with the words, "The person who has entered sahaja samadhi can be blissful seeing I'm going to say her because it's about Amma, seeing her real nature in whatever object she sees." So just seeing everything. She sees her own nature and she goes into rapture, into bliss. Little did they know, while hearing those words of hers, just 2 weeks later, Amma would show them exactly what that looks like. It was during bhajans on New Year's Day, 1982. Amma became intoxicated with divine love, prema bhakti, and she stood up and began dancing ecstatically. The brahmacharis, this was not an unusual sight for them back in those days. So they just kept singing the bhajans with overflowing devotion. And then Amma was on the veranda of that little temple, and then she moved from there towards a grove of coconut trees that was near the temple. And when she reached the coconut grove, she started dancing round and round, completely oblivious to this whole world. And she was showing a divine gesture, the mudras that sometimes she shows with her right hand. And sometimes she shows them with both hands also. But that time it was her right hand that was slightly raised. And a beaming smile lit her face, which was clear even in the dim light. Because it's dusk, right? This ecstatic mood went on for more than half an hour. And it seemed as though there would be no end to it. So this is when the brahmacharis would start to get worried about Amma, and so they made a chain around her by holding hands to protect her from bumping into the coconut trees, because she's so oblivious to her body that she may just fall into a ditch or something. Eventually, Suganachan, Amma's father, appeared on the scene, and he was afraid that his daughter would leave her body soon if this state persisted much longer. He was always afraid, because you know, when Mahatmas go into samadhi like that, there's no guarantee they're going to come back. They can just leave their body like that. So without asking anybody's permission, only he can do something like this. He picked up Amma and carried her to the hut where she would stay at night. And he laid her on a cot, which is a bed frame. Very simple one. Amma was still totally lost to this world, and her body seemed like a corpse. Suganachan, her father, later related, the little one's body, he called Amma the little one's body was so light in weight, it felt like I was lifting a basket full of flowers, but her face was glowing like the rising sun. That is Purna Brahma Surupini, Satchidananda Murti. That's what those first two verses are expressing. She lives it. The next part of this verse 16, there's a reference to moving, right? The moving and non-moving. That moving part is really a superimposition on Brahman. Remember last week we had this word adhyaropa. It means you temporarily superimpose some dualistic concept on Brahman to make it easier for us to conceptualize. So something that's moving, we think, oh, it's alive, it's conscious. Okay, then I can see Brahman in that form. But then he has to mention the unmoving also, which is the apavada part, where he negates the very same superimposition he just made. So why does he have to negate his own example? Because if we just look at as moving beings as being, conscious, or being Brahman rather, there's a danger that we will draw the wrong conclusion that Brahman is only in the moving things. When consciousness is associated with a sentient being, we see that person moving or that being moving, and then we feel perhaps that the consciousness is moving along with it. For example, like a friend of yours may call you from the airport, and you say, "Where are you?" And he says, I'm in JFK. I'm getting on a flight to SFO, to San Francisco. Okay, well, call me when you get there. They land in San Francisco, and they call you and they say, I'm in San Francisco now. So it's like the consciousness is in New York, and then the consciousness is going over to San Francisco, and then it's going somewhere else. Actually, in reality, consciousness is absolutely free from all movement. Just like the reflection of the sun's form in a mirror. We can do the same thing. The sun is reflected in the mirror. We walk around with the mirror and say, oh, and the sun's here, the sun's there. It's not the case. The reflection of the sun can move. And the reflection of consciousness in us can also move. But the consciousness, it does not move. You remember the word for that thing that reflects the consciousness in our subtle body? Chitabhasa. Chitabhasa. Chit is consciousness. Bhasa means reflection. So, that is the thing that's moving in the form of the subtle body, which is attached to this physical body. Then he says it is far away and near. Well, that's a koan if I've ever heard one, right? So, he has to explain that, or we have to explain that to make it a little easier to understand. So when the pure consciousness is associated with God, it's going to feel far away. God meaning like, oh, Ishvara, help me, I need your grace. Or I'm going to go to the temple to offer my pranams to God. Or I'm going to go to church and pray to God. Or, I have to do this to get in touch with God. And then it's far away from me. It's my attitude that makes God feel far away. We may look up at the stars, God, why are you doing all these things to me? Why did you have to send COVID? Amma says that we brought COVID on ourselves. But this is how we relate with God, and like we create the distance. But when you remove that, all those qualities that we are superimposing on God, He's in the temple only, or He's here and there, He's in Kailas, He's in Vaikunta, or all these things, then if you remove all those concepts, then you realize that God is not that, He's this. He's me. I am God, I just don't know that. That's what I have to focus on, is know that I am God. So it's not even correct to say God is the nearest, because the nearer than the nearest is me. It is myself. So that is what it really means. God can be, Brahman is far away when you think it is, and near means it is you when you realize that it is. Shankaracharya says here, as unknown, it is far away, beyond the reach of the ignorant, even for millions of years. To the wise, being their very own self, it is near. So the ignorant person, which means all of us, searches for it outside, which only complicates the process because it is me, myself. And then if it's you yourself, then the more you search, of course, the farther away you go. Sounds kind of like science. The modern science, they're trying to figure out the origin of life and the origin, what is the essential particle of humanity and all the animals. Well, they have to turn their microscopes and telescopes on themselves. Then they'll get the answer. The wise person, however, understands that it's not in a particular place, but it's all pervasive. And if they can realize it within themselves, there's no need to search for it anywhere else. And he concludes the verse with, due to its subtlety, it is incomprehensible. So that means the assumption in this part of the verse is that most people don't have subtle minds. If you have a very subtle mind, a spiritual mind, it's comprehensible in one sense, conceptually. So it will feel nearer. That doesn't mean you're realized if you can just kind of conceptualize it. So we have to be careful, because this part of the verse can be interpreted in two different ways. It can be taken to mean it is incomprehensible to a mind that lacks the subtlety or the purity, because subtlety, according to Vedanta, is a purified mind. All the vasanas and negativities are reduced, so the mind can tune in to the subtle consciousness within, or the all-pervasive consciousness. So that's one interpretation. Another interpretation is that it is incomprehensible because it is your own essence. It's not an object of comprehension in the first place. So we have to discard that idea that we have to observe it or somehow interact with it. It's not an object. It's not a second thing. So different interpretations, but both have important meanings that should affect our daily life also. Now we'll move on to verse 17. Avibhaktancha bhuteshu vibhaktam ivacha sthitam bhuta bhartar chatagnyeyam krasishnu prabha vishnucha. So very few edits for this verse. Indivisible, yet it exists as if divided in beings. It is to be known as the sustainer of beings, devouring and creating them. So we have one commentator has given a nice explanation here, explaining this undividedness. That's I have a few quotes to share about that from the real commentators. One person says, it's a 20th century commentator, how the cosmic consciousness remains undivided has to be comprehended through a few similes. We need similes, so we're very grateful to get these. In a block of ice immersed in the sea, water is present within and without. Space remains undivided in and through all things with form or formless. Similarly, the Paramatman is all-pervading and undivided by the manifest forms. Undivided by the manifest forms. So just because we have all these forms, me, you, 7.8 billion people, and then you have to count all the animals and insects, trillions of life forms. No, there's no separation, there's no division between all of these sentient beings. Shankaracharya says here, in all living beings it abides, but seemingly divided, for it only appears in bodies. What only appears in bodies? Consciousness. Brahman exists everywhere in the form of existence. But if you want to see consciousness, you need a sentient being, by definition. And Jnanadev says, the moonshine is all one, without distinction, even in thousands of earthen pots full of water. So instead of the sunlight being reflected, now it's the moonlight. That's a nice example as well. At dark, it's dark except for the moonlight. And you can have 1,000 of them in the pots, but no, there's only one moon. The salty taste pervades each and every particle of salt and is of one and the same kind. Likewise, the Supreme Brahman pervades as the one single entity in all beings of diverse orders and also the root cause of the universe. I have nothing to add to that. I'm just quoting them because they are the authorities, and we've already touched on that concept a few times. But that word, the sustainer, it did come up in one form earlier in this chapter, but we have one commentator and then Jnanadev. First, we have, as space is the support to the remaining four elements. What are the remaining four elements? Earth, water, air, fire, air. Right? Earth, water, fire, air. And then there's space. So space is the most subtle element, and all of the other four elements exist within space. So space is a beautiful metaphor for Brahman, although it's not actually Brahman. So, but it is easier for us to conceptualize it. Just like that, Paramatman is the universal. Paramatman, the universal consciousness, is the support to the universe and the individual. Jnanadev says, Brahman is the support of all the diverse beings with names and forms, in the way the sea is the support of all the waves, which are created from the sea. So the purpose of this verse is to reject the notion that pure consciousness is divided between beings. So it is it's just one all-pervading principle. It doesn't have any attributes when there's no reflective medium like our subtle body. But when the very same consciousness is available in the body as the Chitabhasa, the reflected consciousness, it becomes an experiencer, so to speak. We, at reflecting that consciousness, are having so many life experiences. Our experience is that of duality, so it's illusory, but it's because that it's associated with the subtle body and all of our vasanas. That's another topic that's going to come up later also. But this also means that though there is only one consciousness, there are as many chitabhasas as there are bodies, as there are living bodies. So if we can say that insects have some low level of consciousness, maybe they have some kind of very minuscule or very, like a subtle body where they feel energy or they have, I don't know if they have emotions, but there may be some subtle body there. even if there's not, we have a minimum of 7.8 billion human Chitabhasas, plus all the animals. So your dog, your cat, your bird, they exhibit some kind of emotions, right? That means they have a subtle body. So if they have a subtle body, they have Chitabhasa. So we have to add so many Chitabhasas are there, but there's only one Chit, one consciousness. So that analogy of the sun reflecting on the water is the best. You have that many pots and only one sun. So the Chit appears to be many, but it's all just one consciousness. Not because Chit is many, consciousness is many, but because bodies are many. So we've already covered that example multiple times. I won't repeat it here. These days, science seems to perceive the brain as the locus of consciousness. I used to think like that also. We do brain surgery and we can find where consciousness is. So, because if the brain gets damaged, it seems like consciousness is getting damaged. But it's not the case, because there may be a problem with the reflective medium of consciousness, the cognizance and the ability to interact with other people. That subtle body may get affected or damaged somehow. But consciousness is always there until it departs from the body. I can remember my own father, who died of Alzheimer's, indirectly, of course. If you know Alzheimer's, it's always indirect. But year by year, it got worse, and that consciousness principle was weaker and weaker with each passing year. Finally, we came to Albuquerque, where for Amma's program, and he was living in Santa Fe. And Amma said I should go visit him, so I went to visit him, and I wanted to, because we knew the end was near. And he was there, like, with his eyes half open, and you could see there was some consciousness there left in the eye. But the next day he was gone. And that consciousness was no longer there in the eyes. So to whatever degree it is, it's reflected there. And then when that reflective medium of the subtle body departs, there's no reflection anymore. It's very clear. So we can never point to the unconditioned consciousness, pure consciousness, because there's nothing to point to. It has no attributes. So that's why we need this Chitabhasa, this reflected version of it, to refer to. And that's why the Upanishads first talk about the Chitabhasa. It makes it easier for an introductory student, beginning student, which we all are, to understand the concept. So we understand that the consciousness is reflected in the subtle body. It doesn't belong to the physical body. Then we need to understand that though Chitabhasa seems to be confined to the body, it actually continues to existence even when the body falls away. So that's the message in verse 20 of chapter 2, where Krishna says, when the body is destroyed, you, the consciousness, are not destroyed. That's a summary of it. In this verse, you refers to pure consciousness. And then, what about this devouring and creating them? That's kind of bizarre, isn't it? Well, Vedanta likes to use words like this, devouring and things like that, because it shows that our perspective is so off. But how do we understand this verse? The Brahman, the pure consciousness, is the creator, sustainer, and destroyer of all. Shankaracharya says, fortunately, that knowable, or that which is to be known, is what sustains beings during their existence. In dissolution, it consumes them. And at the time of manifestation, it originates them illusory, as does the rope to the snake. Now that is a really good time to use that rope and snake metaphor. You must have heard it many times. A person's walking in dusk and he sees there's a rope on the ground, but he sees that rope and it looks like a snake. And in the days when they were coming up with these similes, there must have been a lot of snakes in the forest in India, because it's a common example. Everybody knows what it's like back then. They knew what it was like to walk in the forest and come across a snake. Oftentimes that was a cobra, right? So it's a really important example to get straight. So somebody's walking through the forest at dusk, he sees what looks like a snake and he gets really scared, and he realizes that it's a rope. So the illusory snake comes from the rope. If the rope weren't there, that miscognition or the misunderstanding, the misconstruction of that, misperception of that snake would never have happened. But once he realizes that, oh, it's a rope, then the illusory snake is dissolved back into the rope. Simple. So, in that sense only, the knowable, or that which is to be known, Brahman, we could call it Param Brahman or Atma, whatever you want to call it, that is the reality. And in that reality, we see an illusory projection, and then ultimately when we realize God, our true self, it dissolves back into that. I'll tell you one humorous story to keep you focused amidst all this heavy philosophy. A perfect example of this in a humorous context. So it was, again, quite a few years ago, probably 10 plus years ago, when I think it was the last time Amma went to Perth, Australia. And we were staying at the house of a devotee, the local coordinator there. And there was, Amma's room was adjacent to the kitchen. So if you were, milling around in that area, you might walk past Amma's room. And one of the devotees, local devotees, they were just so overwhelmed with devotion that Amma had come to their city again after a gap of a few years. And she came in front of Amma's room and she saw those white trademark Birkenstock sandals in front of Amma's room. And she just fell down and touched them, and then she held them to her heart, and then she started kissing them. And then she remembered that, it said that the dust of the Guru's feet purify all of your sins. So she started licking the bottom of the sandals. And it was right at that time that one of the tour staff, Radhika, came out of Amma's room. And she says, "Did anybody see my shoes?" She happened to have the same kind of shoes as Amma. So, the reality is that they're not Amma's sandals. But this devotee, misperceived those sandals to be Amma's sandals. So the illusionary Amma sandals were produced by the actual, non-Amma shoes. And then when she realized, they were dissolved. Those Amma sandals were dissolved into the non-Amma sandals. Okay? I think that's a little easier to understand than the traditional snake and rope example. But in this part of this verse, a lot of very profound Upanishadic ideas are packed in. This devouring and creating concept. So normally we think that matter is the fundamental thing. At least that's how I was taught when I grew up. Everything came from matter. This is how science describes things. Only matter was there at the beginning of the universe. There were no living beings at that time, and there was no life at all. It was just the world. After the Big Bang, the world cooled down, and at one point, life happened. Life started. And I looked that up today just out of curiosity, and it's believed that it's 3.8 billion years ago that life began on Earth. How do we know, right? So, and then first these single-celled animals, organisms would come, and then there was a very gradual evolution into fish, and then you had amphibians, land-based animals, and then, the bane of all living beings, in the world came into existence, and that is man. All of us. We came just to ruin the party. And so this whole theory is based on the assumption that matter is fundamental, and life came later. And what happens ultimately? Well, life dies when the sun goes away. And then again, nothing but matter remains. What is this philosophy or cosmology? It is called materialism. Matter is fundamental. Life or spirit or anything that we could identify as being part of life, that comes and goes. So you start with matter, life comes in between, and then life goes, and then you end with matter. But spirituality claims it's the other way around. Consciousness is fundamental. Even before matter came into existence, consciousness was. Before all these elements that we talk about, before the Big Bang even, consciousness was there in the form of Brahman, in seed form. There was no physical manifestation of it. And then in that consciousness, matter came into existence, and it exists now, and will exist until all matter dissolves back into Param Brahma. That's the Pralaya period, the period of dissolution, and at that time only consciousness exists in the seed form. So this is what Krishna is pointing out in very crisp words. Brahman is fundamental, not matter. Consciousness is the source, and matter is the product. Whereas materialism says matter is the source and consciousness is the product. Which one you think Amma would agree with? Definitely the first. Consciousness has always been there. In the materialistic paradigm, the conclusion will be that no consciousness, that there is no consciousness. I sound like Niranjan. In the materialism paradigm, the conclusion will be that there is no consciousness other than matter. Consciousness is the result of some electrical impulses and has no separate existence from matter. But we say the opposite. There's no matter other than consciousness. In fact, according to Vedanta, there is no matter at all. Strictly speaking, only consciousness exists. Now, let us proceed to verse 18. Jyotisham apitat jyotihi. We have to change that to jyotihi because we're breaking it in the middle of the verse. Tamasa paramuchyate jnanam jneyam jnana gamyam hridi. Jnanam jneyam jnana gamyam hridi sarvasya. This last word is misspelled in English. The first SHI, you have to cross that out. Then it becomes Vishtitam. So we'll do that second line again. Cross off or mentally cross off that first SHI in the last word. Jnanam jneyam jnanagamyam hridi sarvasya vishtitam. Okay. The Sanskrit is right. The light itself of all lights, it is said to be entirely beyond darkness, which means the illusionary Maya. We can put that in parentheses. It's not in the actual text. It is knowledge, that which is to be known, the goal of all knowledge, it dwells in the hearts of all. So this same message is conveyed in verses 980 and 981 of the 1,000 Names. Om Jnana Gamyaye Namaha, Om Jnana Jnaya Swarupinye Namaha. She who is to be attained through the yoga of knowledge, I bow down to her. I bow down to her who is both knowledge and the known. So, the knowledge, the known, what is to be attained through the yoga of knowledge. These three things are coming up in this verse. So a more recent commentator said, though the sun and the stars are self-luminous, they lose their luminosity during the pralaya, the dissolution of the universe. All those 125 billion galaxies are going to lose their luminosity. Just think. That's a big loss, right? But that's everything like that. All that physical light is gone during the pralaya. The intellect acquires its power of understanding from the Atma, from the self, but also eventually loses its light. The physical light and darkness, characteristic of inert matter, do not have any effect on or access to the Atman. In pitch darkness, one is not able to see one's own body, but that darkness is no hindrance to the self cognizing its own presence. So we don't need any other light source we don't even need the sun to know that I am, to be aware that I exist. This self-cognizance is not improved by the presence of sunlight. Self-awareness is self-evident. The sunlight and darkness are perceived by the physical eye because of the light it has acquired from the Atman. That came up in a previous verse, right? When she was talking about the Brahman shining through the sense organs. The senses perceive, the mind feels, and the intellect deliberates because of the light they get from the Atman. So this commentary goes beyond just the sense organs. He's talking about the mind and the intellect as well. So this verse really does help us understand how we should view Brahman. Normally, knowing something means our intellect as the knower is illuminating an object of some kind. For example, the first time we saw Amma's photo, we knew, quote unquote, knew something about Amma's form, which amounted to the eyes, or the faculty of sight, illuminating a photo, and then the intellect associating that with a being. So the eyes illuminate the form, and then the intellect, also shining from the same consciousness, makes that connection. This form plus Amma, these are set. These go together. That's a deliberation, right? So when we first heard her bhajans, our ears, the hearing faculty in reality, illuminated, so to speak, the sound of the bhajans. And I'm very grateful for that, because after I met Amma in 1990, or when I met Amma in 1990, I got my hands on the 1987 World Tour bhajans. And I cannot tell you how much I abused that tape. I mean, those days there were only tapes, right? So I just listened to it all day long. I don't know what it was. It was like I was, obsessed, or like, I don't know, just a madman. I didn't listen to other music anymore because it just captivated my soul. I didn't understand why, but later I understood that somehow I must have been with Amma in a previous lifetime. She says that all of us were, so I hope that includes me also. And Gajanana, Gopala Krishna, Radha Krishna. Everybody loves that song. Durge, Durge, Karunale. My ears were illuminating those sounds for me to understand and experience Amma remotely. But without the consciousness, what are the ears? They're not useful. There's no benefit of having them at all. So these instruments of knowledge are called pramanam in Sanskrit. It just means literally like a measure or a scale or a standard of some type. It can be of weight, length, or capacity, or sound, or whatever it may be. It is as though the sense organs are sizing up some kind of sensory information. So the tongue size up, measure taste, and then the nose measures smell, like that. And what these senses, or the pramanams, what they know, so to speak, quote unquote, know, is called pramayam in Sanskrit. So what is known through sense organs is pramayam, and those sense organs themselves are called pramanam. But in Vedanta, this whole process is looked upon as a kind of illumination. If we want to know whether a dish is sweet or sour, the pramanam is the tongue, and that illuminates whether it's sweet or sour. And if we want to know, like let's say you're taking the Amrita Culture course now, and you're learning about compost or something like that, you can tell whether your compost is doing good through the pramanam of smell and other things as well. But it should smell good, not too bad, because when it emits the bad smell is when you're having problems. So all these things are illuminating sights, sounds, smells in the world around us. And each such instrument of knowledge has its limitations as well. It can only illuminate one aspect of the world. Like you cannot put food in your ear to taste it. You cannot, smell through your mouth. So all these things, they have limitations, and they all also have a range, like a spectrum that they can access but not beyond. We can't hear what dogs hear and elephants hear or whatever it is. So very limited ability to illuminate as well. So even with this understanding of this process of illumination, the one thing that we should never forget is that none of it makes any difference without consciousness. The consciousness principle, or Brahman, is the one thing that creates the foundation for all five senses, and for the mind, and for the intellect. So all these inner tools, or antakarana as we call them, are useless without consciousness. We can think of them as tools or equipment. Just in the sense of knowledge, even the most advanced microscope or telescope cannot illuminate anything without a conscious or sentient being to use it. So a pair of the latest hearing aids may set you back about $12,000, a really good one. But even the best hearing aids are useless without sentience. Right? I'll tell you a little humorous example. This guy buys the top of the line hearing aid, and he is sitting with his friend. He's an elderly guy, he's losing his hearing, very elderly. And he says to his other very, very elderly friend, kind of proudly, he says, "Hey, I just got the best top-of-the-line hearing aids today." And his friend said, "Really? Wow. What kind are they? What kind is it? What kind is it?" And the guy says, "It's $230." Because he didn't have Shraddha when they put him in. He forgot to turn them on. So he was bragging, but he is conscious, but not so conscious. And that way, the hearing aids were a waste of money for that time. So sentience is most important. And though we call the sense organs instruments of knowledge, they are really just tools. They're, instruments. I guess that's the right word. And consciousness is the one that's actually illuminating everything. But there's one thing that consciousness cannot illuminate. What is that? Consciousness. Not only is it impossible, it is unnecessary. Does the sun have to illuminate itself? No. Do we need another sun to see the sun? Borrow a sun from another galaxy or something like that? No. Because it's self-luminous, it doesn't need any other light, and it's impossible to make it any brighter than it is. So in our case, in the world, it's the sun. It's self-effulgent, and in the physical sense. But in the case of Brahman, it is the very illuminator of even the sun. How so? Because if you don't have consciousness, or if it's an inert thing, it cannot see or perceive the sun, right? And there's other reasons as well, more symbolic reasons. But Brahman is the very illuminator, the knower itself. But the sun is a beautiful analogy. It's really helpful for us to perceive what is meant by that, like Brahman being the illuminator of everything. That's what's being explained in this verse. And interestingly, that is because Brahman is the self-effulgent being in the metaphysical sense, while the sun is the illuminator in the physical sense. So in astrology, the sun is the sign of, or the symbol of the self, the consciousness, your true self. So we can add that to our biodata. When you go for a job, let's say you go for a job interview and the interviewer says, "So tell me about yourself." You say, "Well, I'm the conscious principle that lends consciousness to the 5 sense organs. And borrowing consciousness from me, the sense organs become effulgent. And with the sense organs, I can illuminate all the sense objects. But since the sense organs themselves are illumined by me, they cannot illuminate me." Right? And he's like, "Next," right? So it's like the flashlight is unable to illuminate one thing. What is it unable to illuminate? Well, the battery, especially. Yeah, you could say it cannot illuminate itself, but the source of the light is the battery in that case, like the electricity. And the light bulbs here that we have in this room they cannot illuminate the electricity because it's not visible. So these are metaphors. They have their limitations for sure. But the fact that the flashlight works is proof of the existence of the battery. The camera doesn't need a photo of itself to prove its existence. The photo itself is the proof. Similarly, that feeling that I exist, that's going on all day long, is proof of the existence of Brahman, of consciousness. The fact that I exist. I'm not saying as separate from God, just that I-ness within me, within all of us. That's the only proof we need. And we only need sense organs when we are trying to perceive something that is separate from ourselves. If you want to hear the phone, you need to use your ears. Or even if you put it on vibrate mode, still it's the sense of touch. So through that you can know something. Or you need your eyes to see the car, or see the steering wheel, or feel which cloth is softer, or something like that. So we need the sense organs for that kind of distinction, but we don't need the help of anything to confirm I am. Right now, let's take the example of school. You're a kid in 6th grade, and it's the first day of school, and you have a new teacher, and the teacher's calling roll. Jones, here. Johnson, here. Smith. You're sitting right there. Why didn't you raise your hand? And he said, I'm not quite sure whether I'm here or not. I didn't know what to respond. Okay, give that guy a special test. Because you don't need to ask anybody or think whether you're here or not. So no confirmation is required. Now, what does it mean to be entirely beyond darkness? Well, you may remember Jim Carrey's version of it when he met Amma. He posted to 20 million, I think, followers he has on Twitter. I was feeling down about life and love. Then I met a woman. And you think, a lover? No. A woman named Amma. And she gave me back my smile. Can you believe it? That one of the most famous comedians needed to have his smile restored. And then he said, darkness cannot compete with her. So when people get depressed and upset, especially during COVID time, it feels like there's a lot of darkness, right? Not just in the world around, but then somehow it creeps inside of our mind. So then when Amma comes, it was his first time meeting her, so it's not like he read all her books. Instantaneously he felt that she just wiped away, obliterated the darkness when he was in her presence. So that is one person's experience, but when we want to look at it from a little bit deeper Advaitic or Vedantic standpoint, Shankaracharya says that it is the lights of all lights, such as the sun, etc., which shine only when they are kindled by the spiritual fire of the self. So some of you may have heard that chant that we chant when Amma enters the hall. The last part of that is from the Mundaka Upanishad, part 2, second Kanda, verse 10. And these lines will be familiar to you, I'm sure. Na tatra suryo bhati na chandradaragam nema vidyido bhanti kutoyam agnihi tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhati. The meaning is, the sun shines not there, nor the moon and the stars, nor does the lightning shine, not to speak of this fire. It's a mantra that probably was originally chanted around the Homa fire. When he shines, everything shines after him. By his light, everything is lighted. So that him just refers to Brahman, Paramatman. We could say her. For us, it's Amma. When Amma shines, everything shines after her. Her light, by her light, everything is lighted. Remember, last week I told you that everything we're learning about Brahman is equivalent to learning about Amma. So don't think it's some far-off thing in another galaxy. It is your own guru, if you view Amma as your guru. And if she's your beloved deity also, you're learning about your beloved deity. So if you really love somebody, you want to understand them. You want to know who they are more and more. So this is what Amma's true being is. And a little bit more about the beyond darkness. It means that it is the only light that can illumine darkness. What do you mean? Well, every light illumines darkness. Not really, exactly. Other lights cannot illumine darkness. They can dispel darkness, but they cannot illuminate darkness, because light and dark are mutually exclusive. They cannot coexist. So if there is a light that can truly illuminate darkness, it cannot be something on the physical plane. Only consciousness can illumine both light and darkness. So you go into the room, how do you know whether it's light or dark? Your eyes tell you. But then there is a way, like when you're in darkness, your mind tells you, that the consciousness tells you this room is dark. You didn't need to take a flashlight and illuminate, right? So it is recognizing the darkness, and that's how we know it's dark. Otherwise, we would walk and we wouldn't know that it's dark, because there's no light. So only consciousness can illuminate the presence or absence of light. And this means that it's not only beyond darkness, it's beyond light as well. Because in order to be the witness of both light and darkness, it has to be beyond both of them, right? If you're not beyond something, you cannot witness it. If you're part of it, you cannot witness the whole thing. So consciousness can see both. And it's beyond both. And knowledge, that which is to be known, the goal of all knowledge. That part of the verse. Shankaracharya points out that the first word, knowledge, is referring, we have to remember, in this chapter refers to virtues, not like transcendental knowledge, right? And that topic was covered from verse 8 to 12 of this chapter. And the second word, which is that which is to be known, is what was described in verses 13 to 18, also known as the Jnayam. And the goal of knowledge, what is that? It means the fruit of cultivating all these virtues. What is the fruit? Ultimately, realizing ourself. These are the path to Brahman. Values are the path to Brahman. And through those values, what is known is Brahman. And by knowing Brahman, the liberation that we attain is also Brahman. They're all Brahman, in other words. I mean, the virtues are delayed Brahman, you could say. And then you attain Brahman, and the moksha that you get is also Brahman. According to Vedanta, moksha and Brahman are the same thing. You should know that. Because if moksha, if liberation is different from Brahman, that means it's not infinite. It's also impermanent. It's an experience that I have to get back again later. No, if it is permanent, then there's only one permanent. That's Brahman or Paramatman, whatever you want to call it, Atman. Moksha means attaining that. So that's why we don't say that moksha is an experience or a state, because then it's temporary, it's going to end, and we have to get it back again. So experiences are always temporary. Yeah, that's why you probably have realized by now that Amma doesn't, encourage people to have spiritual experiences, because when they go away, they'll be sad. And they definitely will go away at one point. And moksha has nothing to do with going somewhere like Vaikunda, Kailasa, or somewhere like that, because any place or time delimits that thing. So moksha actually is freedom from all limitations. And then he says it dwells in the hearts of all. Shankaracharya says very somewhat humorously that Krishna put this part in just to give Arjuna the feeling like there is some hope that he's going to be able to realize this knowledge. It dwells in the hearts of all. So it's encouragement for Arjuna and, of course, us too, that there's some hope. I can probably realize this because it's right here. It still feels separate, but the fact that it's in my heart gives me some hope. Because Brahman is myself. That's the point, though, the real point. Moksha, liberation, is my original state. That's why in that Indinishokam manase Nijam bhavam adalla. So why are you sad, mind? That is not your original nature. That is not your eternal nature. So it's supposed to be that my nature is not sorrow. It is liberation. So we have to get that back. We have to realize that. When we say things like attain moksha, we have to be careful that we don't strengthen that notion that it's a state that I get at one point in time in a particular place or whatever. Because then it's outside, it's separate from me, and I have to keep getting it over and over again. So when he puts it like this, that it's in our own heart, then we can understand to some degree that it's once you realize it, it's permanent, because it's your true self. And another misunderstanding, potential misunderstanding, is that that of meditating with the hope that consciousness will come in the heart, like maybe in the form of a light or a jyoti or some flame or green light, red light, blue light. People say like these things to Amma. What does it mean? I saw a blue light or a green light in my meditation. So, basically, all these things are just kalpanas. They're just, imaginations of the mind. Because the real, I'm sorry just to put it that way so bluntly, but the point is that those any light we experience in a meditative state is temporary. It's not the real Jyoti that's being spoken of here. It's not the light that Krishna is referring to here. That life is never going to come because it's already there. It is the consciousness itself, and consciousness is not an object. You know, it's like waiting for consciousness to come. It's like waiting for me to come. I'm already here, so what do I have to wait for? So for now, our meditation is for focusing and quietening the mind so we can identify that which has always been there, the pure consciousness. Some people complain about their meditation, like say at the end of the I am or after the white flowers meditation, they may sit very still. But then they say like my mind calms down and I empty my mind of all the thoughts. But there's nothing. After that there's nothing. What am I supposed to do? Why do you have to do anything? You know, is that a problem? From there, it's so much easier to recognize that nothing is simply consciousness. But the mind wants to find something. So that's the mistake we make. That nothingness is being illuminated by the consciousness. That's how you're able to perceive that there's nothing there. So just enjoy that state. An empty mind means conscious without any objects. Just enjoy it. Don't try to fill up the emptiness with something unnecessary. So with this verse, Krishna concludes the topic of the Jnayam, or that which is to be known. And that began in verse 13, if you would like to refer to that again. And he's about to go into a new topic, but before he does, he thankfully sort of summarizes the essence of this chapter, of this section of the chapter. So let us read that in verse 19. I think we can finish that as well. Iti kshetram tata jnanam jnayam choktam samasataha madbhakta etadvijnaya madbhavayopapadyate madbhavayopapadyate. There we go. Thus, the kshetra, knowledge, and that to be known have been briefly stated. Knowing this, my devotee becomes fit to enter my being. Wow, that is a big carrot to motivate all of us to make the effort to reach that state. So he says, it's been briefly stated. It may not have felt very brief. Took us a couple of classes to cover it. But this topic has already been very detailed, has been expounded in great detail in the Upanishads, which are obviously before Lord Krishna's time. So, you know, he doesn't want to repeat all those things. He says, you study the Upanishads, and now I'm just reminding you of those truths. And so he has covered now 4 topics in this chapter. The first one was kshetram, the field, which turned out to be this entire universe. Then he talked about kshetrajna, the knower of the field, which was Brahman basically. And then he talked about jnanam, which was those virtues that lead us to Brahman. And then here he's talking about jnayam, which is that which is to be known. So number 4, that last topic was what he was talking about from 13 to 15. But he omits one of these 4, which was kshetrajna. He doesn't talk about the knower of the field, the knower of the kshetra, for some reason, even though he described it briefly in verses 2 and 3. The only reason that makes sense for him to omit that is because the knower of the field, the kshetrajna, and jnayam, that which is to be known, are one and the same. They're both Brahman, they're both Atma, they're both consciousness. That is why in the previous verse itself he said, it dwells in the hearts of all, which is supposed to be the kshetrajna, because before Krishna described that the knower of the field is the one that abides in all beings, himself, as that knower. So once you hear that it as Param Brahma dwells in the hearts of all, okay, so now I know that Brahman and the knower of the field, all these things are the same thing. Jnayam, Param Brahma, Atma, Brahman, Kshetrajna, consciousness, Chaitanyam, Chit, Sat, everything. We cannot really divide them, but they're just different facets. We can somehow refer to them in that way. So that which is to be known is from the standpoint of the totality, whereas the knower of the field is what we are experiencing, because we're experiencing this world. So we can identify with that more on an individual level. But when we talk about the whole universe, then you talk about that which is to be known, Brahman. So the same thing, juxtaposing Atma against Brahman when they're really the same, just a different standpoint. Jnanadev puts it like this. He says, I really like this one. Just as one big morsel of food is split up into 20 small ones when feeding a small child, in that way, the theme of Brahman, although a single one, was expounded to you in 4 different aspects. So beautiful. So now, looking forward, 2 topics remain, only 2 remain to be discussed based on the question that Arjuna asked at the beginning of chapter 13, which we must have all forgotten by now, so I'll remind you. Prakrti and Purusha, also the Kshetra and Kshetrajna, knowledge and that which ought to be known, these, O Keshava, I desire to learn. So of all these 6, which ones have yet to be described? Prakrti and Purusha. Prakrti means literally nature. We've talked about it off and on. And Purusha is typically considered to be it means man, but it's like the Shiva-Shakti duality. Shakti, the divine feminine, is Prakrti, and Shiva, the divine masculine, is Purusha. Really, they're not separate, but it's to help us understand what they mean. So he is going to talk about those next. And in this verse, Krishna gives Arjuna, a little pause to recuperate after all that subtle and profound spiritual wisdom on Param Brahma. Maybe Krishna felt like Arjuna's head was spinning, and so he needed a little break and also some more encouragement, because now, if I learn the meaning of this, then I deserve to attain, I become fit to enter Krishna's being. Wow, that is a very tantalizing promise. So the part of the guru's job is to help the disciple. One part of the guru's job is to help the disciple maintain his or her enthusiasm. Amma's constantly doing that for all of us. We've all made so many mistakes. She will scold us maybe a little bit, and then afterwards she will stroke your head very quietly and saying, it's like, no, did I make you feel sad? No, you really did a good job of it. There was this one little thing that was not proper, and then she kind of butters you up and then keeps your motivation going. Like that one brahmachari the other day, after he made a big mistake, not terrible one, but just some mistake, he called Amma called him, and she said, are you sad that I scolded you for that? And then his response was, Amma, is there any point in my being here? I'm so useless. And then Amma said, I think what she said in response was, it's better to wear away than to rust away, from disuse. May our life serve some purpose. Once we leave the ashram, we're not going to be using it for the sake of serving the world. So all of us get motivated when we hear the benefits of a particular sadhana or knowledge. So that benefit Krishna gives here as entering his being. Wow, who is fit and why? Shankaracharya says, my devotee, one who has surrendered himself totally to me, the Supreme Lord, one who has the intellectual conviction that whatever is seen, heard, or touched is the blessed Lord Vasudeva. So if we want to become fit to enter Amma's being, we have to say the same thing. Am I one who has surrendered totally to Amma? Do I have the intellectual conviction that everything I see, even the guy who cuts me off on the freeway, even the boss that doesn't treat me nicely, all these people, maybe your own family members, all that is seen, heard, or touched is Amma? That's hard for us to do. The knowledge referred to in this chapter is extremely subtle, so only a sincere devotee will be able to grasp it. The devotees' love, surrender, and obedience invoke the Guru's grace, which is the most important thing. And we heard about such a supreme devotee or parabhakta in chapter 12. You can read about all the qualities that the supreme devotee has. Very high standard. Literally, we would just assume that is the description of a realized being. Because parabhakti or supreme devotion means there's no division between me and the form that I worship. I'm practically dissolved into that or fully dissolved into that. So it's realization or just one very small step before realization. And that's why, we can say that, or Krishna can say that he becomes or she becomes fit to attain my nature. Shankaracharya clearly says that this reference means moksha. So it means that kind of a devotee is really close to moksha, and that gives a lot more meaning to those verses in chapter 12. So having given that what's called palastuti, the praise of the rewards that you get from learning this teaching, he's done that, and now he's going to enter into the last two topics, Prakrti and Purusha. That's going to be from verses 20 to 25. And Jnanadev gives us additional narration here, saying, I will now explain to you how to separate Purusha from Prakrti. Now do listen, said the primeval person. Next week we'll hear what the primeval person has to say. Om Namah Shivaya. There were two very brief questions which I can answer. We'll go over just a couple minutes over the time, sorry. Then we'll have a short meditation. The first question is, you were saying in one of the classes, some sannyasi is sitting in meditation and every Treta Yuga, Hanuman will appear and ask to keep a ring in his pot, the Kamandalu, I forgot how you pronounce it. And when Hanuman comes back to get the ring, there will be thousands of rings left by the Hanuman before him. And Hanumanji won't be able to pick the right ring. This is Sita's ring that he got from in Lanka to prove that he met her. So, this person's question is, does that mean that every Kali Yuga, Amma will also incarnate and you and me will also be in the same body as we have now with the very same life, me listening to your class? If yes, is it the same soul coming to the bodies or is another soul playing me and you? Because I have heard Lord Indra as a position. Believe me, nobody's going to want to earn our position, do any tapas to become us. Each time different souls become Indra. Yes, okay. So now this deserves a very careful response. We should understand the role of the Puranas and Intihasas. The Ramayana is an Intihasa, but it's like a lot of the Puranas, like Bhagavad Puranam, These stories are not meant to be taken too literally. They are there primarily to demonstrate what is dharma, what is adharma, and what are the beautiful manner in which spiritual evolution manifests in a true seeker, in a tapasvi, in an ascetic, in a fully realized being, and in an avatar. And the opposite side of that, people who are falling into darkness, people who are immersed into darkness, people who are complete demons in their behavior. So we have the whole spectrum of human potential, the bad, the worst, and the best, the maximum. So there's so many examples of these beings in the Puranas and Intihasas. So we're supposed to learn from those examples, not analyze them as a historical commentary. So it's not meant to that we are going to be becoming like that. The point in that story, you have to remember that the sara of the story, the essence of the story is not about, are we coming back next yuga? It's even Hanumanji had to face the challenge of pride. So if Hanumanji suffers from pride, which one of us can say that I don't suffer from pride? That's all. It's not that we shouldn't pray to Hanumanji is a Amsha avatar, right? So, we don't talk about his defects. We use that story to look at our defects. So don't misconstrue it and derive the wrong moral from the story. And about Amma, I did ask, I was witness to someone asking a question to Amma about that. It was in Japan many years ago. Someone said that I'm told that such and so, guru, his previous guru was Arjuna at the time of the Bhagavad Gita. And so he said to Amma, who were you at the time of the Gita? Amma laughed so hard, And, I was thinking like, she's Krishna, of course. But she didn't say that. She didn't say that probably just out of humility. But also her answer was even more profound. She says, Amma has always been Amma. She's always been the mother to all beings. So what she's saying is that she is coming. I mean, she was doing Kali Bhava, Devi Bhava, Krishna Bhava. She could do Shiva Bhava, all these Ganesha Bhava. Whatever she wants, she can do. But she is manifesting that universal motherhood concept. That's how she's choosing to express divinity. She can always change, of course, but she says Amma has always been Amma so far. So it's a beautiful way to look at Amma. And Indra's position is not just a story. It's actually something, supposedly a reality. If you do so much tapas for who knows how many millions of years, you may get that status of Indra. But then the important thing is not how to become Indra. It is like, what is the point of becoming Indra? Who wants to become Indra? Because after you exhaust all your merits, you come back to the earth and you start all over again. And what was the use? You had a lot of pleasures, but then it's over. So Amma says, don't aspire for, and even the scriptures, that's the message. Don't aspire for these kind of special titles and positions. Everything is temporary. Not just Indra, the whole universe is temporary. So what to say of Indra? So it's not a worthwhile endeavor. And another person is asking, after the pandemic restrictions are over, will classes and bhajans be streamed for viewers who live far from the ashram? Only Amma knows. Even we don't know. So we'll see how it goes. I'm neither for nor against that. We'll see what Amma decides. And you will all certainly be informed once we know the answer to that question. Om Namah Shivaya. We'll close with a couple of mantras. After that, those who have time can remain and meditate with us. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwariye Namaha. Let us take a few moments. Take this opportunity to meditate together some time. Check your posture. Try to keep your back and neck relatively straight. Slow down the breathing process and feel the body and mind relaxing further and further with each and every inhalation and exhalation. Try to feel Amma's subtle presence all around you. And just as the pure consciousness pervades everywhere, understand that that all-pervasive consciousness is Amma, pervading within you. Within you means that notion, that feeling, I exist. That is the Amma in you. Slowly, the mind becomes more and more quiet and still. Now we can focus our awareness on each and every part of the body, one by one. This will build up our ability to concentrate and witness. Then we will drop the objects of witnessing and try to remain established in pure witnessing, which is nothing other than consciousness. So be fully aware of your feet. Focus all your awareness on your feet. then your ankles. Now focus on your shins and calves. Be fully aware of your knees. Be fully aware of your calves, of your thighs. Be fully conscious of your pelvis and your hips. Be fully conscious of your lower back and stomach, your abdomen. Be fully aware of your upper back and your chest. Be fully conscious of your shoulders. Be fully aware of your upper arms. Your elbows. Focus completely on your lower arms. Be aware of your wrists. Now the hands and fingers. Be fully aware of your neck. Your head and face. Now, from being fully conscious of your head and face, drop all objects and simply be fully conscious, fully aware. No object needed. try to remain in that witness state. Try to retain that full consciousness as long as you can. And let us conclude with one final mantra. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, slowly open your eyes. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for joining us again. I'm sorry that there's no satsang this Saturday. Hopefully there are other programs going on all over the world, Amma programs. Pretty much every minute of the day, some satsang group is having a Zoom. But even Amma's daily bhajans are going to be there. So what do we? You don't need Shantamritananda. But we will have Gita class next Thursday, and as far as I know, and also Saturday. And we'll be referring to Ram Navami. There's Ram Navami this coming week. The details, I think, are coming out on the e-news, both national and Chicago. I might be wrong. Keep your eyes and ears peeled, and we will see you soon. Om Namah Shivaya.